my stepsister humiliated me at her wedding, telling everyone I was too ugly to be in the family photos. A year later, she sat front row at Paris Fashion Week. When I walked the runway, the announcer said, introducing the face of Versace's next campaign, and she spilled her purse on the floor while screaming my name. I never thought I'd be the one on stage at Paris Fashion Week, and certainly not as the face of Versace's next campaign. But the strangest part? 1 year ago, my stepsister Victoria humiliated me at her wedding, telling everyone I was too ugly to be in the family photos. A year later, there she was, sitting front row at the show, watching as I walked the runway. When the announcer called me the new face of Versace, she dropped her purse and screamed my name. Let me tell you how it all unfolded. I never thought I'd be in the position to tell a story like this. But sometimes life has a funny way of proving to you that the universe has its own plans, no matter how hard people try to shape your destiny. My name's Simone, and this is my story of how a single cruel moment in my life sparked a chain of events that I could never have imagined in a million years. Growing up, I was always the quiet, less attention-grabbing child. I wasn't ugly by any means, but I certainly wasn't beautiful in the conventional sense. My parents were young when they had me, and while they loved me fiercely, I always had a sense that I wasn't the one they had planned for. After my mother passed when I was 14, my dad remarried. That's when everything changed. Laura was lovely, a bit too perfect, if I'm honest. She was one of those women who walked into a room and immediately became the center of attention. She had grace, charm, and that effortless beauty that seemed to make everyone else invisible by comparison. She brought with her a daughter, Victoria, who was the epitome of the golden child. At least, that's how I felt. Victoria was beautiful, tall, blonde, effortlessly stylish. She was everything I wasn't. If there was ever an opportunity to compare us, it was clear who would win in the looks department. She could walk into a room, and people would gravitate toward her. I always felt like I was in the background, trying to be noticed but never quite fitting into the mold of what was acceptable. But I had a quiet strength, one I wasn't sure would ever be enough to stand out. Then, one fateful day, my dad announced that he was getting remarried again, this time to Laura. And with that came the wedding, the biggest and most elaborate event that I had ever been a part of. It was going to be an extravagant affair, held in a historic mansion in Richmond, Virginia, a city known for its southern charm. It was the kind of wedding that you'd only expect to see in movies. I had just finished high school and was about to start college, still grappling with my insecurities. But when I was asked to be a bridesmaid, I thought maybe things could turn around. Maybe this was my chance to show I could be part of their world. But from the moment I stepped into that mansion, something felt off. Victoria had made it clear from the beginning that I wasn't quite her type. She didn't say it out loud, but the coldness in her voice and the dismissive glances she gave me made it obvious. She had picked out the bridesmaid dresses with meticulous attention to detail, ensuring they were sleek and chic, everything I wasn't. She told me my dress didn't fit right and asked me to just wear something simple for the family photos. The wedding day arrived, and everything was perfect on the surface. Guests flooded into the grand hall, taking their seats under crystal chandeliers, and the ceremony unfolded in a sea of white roses and champagne toasts. But there was one moment that would haunt me forever. The photos. The photographer was directing the bridal party for the family photos, and as everyone gathered in place, something happened that I never saw coming. Victoria, my stepsister, turned to me with that same cool smile she always wore when she was about to say something pointed. "Simone," she said, her voice loud enough to be heard by a few nearby people. "I think you should step out of the family pictures. You know, it's just, you're a bit too big boned to fit in with all of us. We wouldn't want the photos to be ruined." I froze. The room seemed to blur around me. The words she had just spoken were a punch to my gut, but I couldn't move, couldn't respond. I felt the eyes of her family and friends on me, all of them silently agreeing, all of them smiling that same polite smile as if they had just witnessed some kind of performance. For a long moment, I stood there, feeling my face burn with humiliation. Everyone else continued smiling for the photos as if I wasn't even there. My heart was pounding, my hands trembling, and all I could do was step back. I forced myself to keep my head down, to leave the room and find a place to cry. But even though I didn't show it, that moment stuck with me. It became the seed of something I didn't know I had, the desire to prove to myself and to everyone else that I was more than the person they saw in me. I started making small changes. I joined a local gym. I learned how to walk with confidence, and over time, I discovered something I hadn't expected: I could be beautiful in my own way. A year passed, and I had left Richmond behind to start my studies and pursue something that seemed a little less far-fetched than I had once believed: modeling. It started with small gigs, magazine spreads, local shoots, but then I caught the attention of an agency in New York. They thought I had potential. It was crazy. Me? The girl who had once been told she was too ugly to be in a family photo? But there I was, walking through the doors of one of the most prestigious agencies in the city. Fast forward another year. It was Paris Fashion Week, and I was backstage, preparing for the biggest show of my life, the Versace Runway. Everything about it felt unreal, like I was dreaming. The lights, the crowd, the energy in the air was electric. I had finally made it. This was what I had worked for, what I had fought for. And there, in the front row, I saw her. Victoria. She was sitting front and center, of course, surrounded by the usual celebrities, designers, and socialites. Her flawless hair, her expensive designer dress, her smile that could convince anyone that she was still the golden girl. She didn't know I was going to be in the show. She didn't know that I was about to become the face of Versace's next campaign. But as I stepped onto the runway, all eyes were on me. Introducing the face of Versace's next campaign, Simone, the announcer's voice rang out over the loudspeakers. The world seemed to stop in that moment. I felt the cameras flashing, the applause growing louder. And then, I looked up into the audience. Victoria's face went pale. Her hand trembled as she gripped her purse. The smile she had once worn so confidently now faltered, her eyes wide in disbelief. And then it happened. Her purse slipped from her lap, spilling its contents all over the floor, while she screamed my name, loud enough for the whole room to hear. Simone. The crowd went silent for a second. There was a moment of awkwardness, then murmurs and chuckles rippled through the audience. But I couldn't look away from her. I could see the panic in her eyes as she scrambled to gather her things, her fingers shaking. She was no longer the untouchable one. She wasn't the golden child anymore. No, now she was the one who was falling apart. And as I walked down the runway, I couldn't help but think about that wedding day. The words she had spoken to me. How I had felt so small. Now, it was her who was small in that moment. And I felt nothing. Nothing except relief. As I finished my walk down the runway, the applause and flashing lights felt almost surreal. But my eyes never left Victoria. She was still sitting there, her hands trembling as she quickly collected her spilled items from the floor. I couldn't hear her words, but I saw the way her mouth moved, how her lips shaped around my name, as if she was trying to make sense of the moment. There was a sick satisfaction in watching her crumble, something deep inside me that had been buried for so long, something I hadn't even realized was there, finally surfaced. I didn't feel the need to approach her. I didn't feel the desire to rub my success in her face. But there was a quiet victory in knowing that, in some way, I had won. I had taken everything she thought she could strip away from me and turned it into something bigger, something more beautiful than I had ever imagined. The rest of the show went on without a hitch, but my mind kept drifting back to the scene with Victoria. My hand still shook from the adrenaline, but I couldn't deny the way it had felt. I had worked so hard to get here. This was my moment. Backstage, the air was filled with excitement and chaos. The models were hustling around, preparing for their next looks, photographers snapping shots of them as they passed by. My stylist was waiting for me, her eyes wide with admiration as I approached. "Simone," she said, her voice almost breathless. "You were incredible. Absolutely incredible. The crowd loved you." I managed a small smile, still reeling from the earlier encounter. "Thanks," I replied, my voice shaky. "It's all still sinking in." Before I could say anything more, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting to see a message from my agent, but instead, it was a text from Victoria. "I'm sorry." The words were simple, but the weight behind them felt heavy. I stared at the screen for a moment, not sure how to respond. After everything that had happened, after everything she had said to me, I wasn't sure if I should even acknowledge her apology. But there was something about it, something in the way she reached out, that tugged at me. I took a deep breath and typed back, letting my fingers linger over the keys before sending my response. "I don't need your apology." I hit send and tossed my phone aside. I wasn't sure why I had responded like that. Maybe it was because I had spent so many years chasing her approval, waiting for a sign that she saw me as equal, as worthy. But I didn't need that anymore. I had built my life on my own terms, and I was no longer dependent on her validation. The next morning, I woke up in my hotel room in Paris, the city still buzzing with the energy of Fashion Week. The previous day's events were a blur, and the gravity of everything that had happened hadn't fully hit me yet. I stood by the window, looking out over the cityscape as I sipped my coffee, wondering how it had all come together. Then, a knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. I opened it, and standing there was my manager, looking unusually serious. "Simone, we need to talk," she said, her tone tight. I followed her into the room and sat down on the edge of the bed, suddenly nervous. My manager pulled out a piece of paper from her bag. It was an official-looking letter with a Versace logo on top. "What's this?" I asked, feeling a knot form in my stomach. "It's a contract," she said, her voice steady. "They want you to be the face of their next campaign. You're exactly what they're looking for. They've already seen your runway walk, and they're offering you a huge deal." My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't believe it. This was everything I had worked for. Everything I had dreamed of. But even with the excitement bubbling inside me, I couldn't shake the image of Victoria's face from the night before. The way she had looked at me in that moment. It was as though she was realizing, for the first time, that I was no longer the person she could push aside. I signed the contract right then and there, but my mind kept wandering back to that moment in Paris. A few weeks later, I was back in New York, deep in the preparations for the Versace campaign. Everything was moving so fast. Photo shoots, fittings, meetings with designers. It felt like a whirlwind. But every time I stepped into a room, every time I caught my reflection in the mirror, there was a part of me that was still processing what had happened, what had changed in me. And then, one evening, I received a message from Victoria. "I need to talk. Can we meet?" I stared at the message for a long time, unsure what to do. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let her continue living in the illusion that she had been the one in control. But another part of me, one that had been healing for so long, wondered if there was more to this apology than I was giving her credit for. The next day, I agreed to meet her at a cafe in Brooklyn. I arrived a few minutes early, and as I sat down at the table, I couldn't help but wonder what she wanted from me. I hadn't seen her since the show, and the thought of seeing her again made my stomach churn. But I had to know. When Victoria finally walked in, she looked different. Her hair was no longer perfectly styled, and her usual confident air had been replaced with something I couldn't quite place, vulnerability, maybe. She sat down across from me, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then, she finally broke the silence. "I've been an awful person, Simone," she said, her voice quiet. "I've spent so many years looking down on you, judging you for things I had no right to judge. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I was jealous. Or maybe I was just insecure about myself. But I was wrong. I sat there, stunned, as she continued. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of shame and regret. I'm sorry for everything I said at the wedding. I'm sorry for making you feel like you didn't belong. You're not just beautiful, you're strong, and you've accomplished so much more than I ever could. I've watched you rise, and I've realized that I was the one holding you back. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. The words she was saying didn't sound like the person who had humiliated me a year ago. But maybe people could change. Maybe this was the sign I had been waiting for. But part of me couldn't help but wonder if this apology was just another ploy, another way for her to reassert control over me. So, what now? I asked, my voice steady but cautious. I don't expect you to forgive me, she replied, her voice breaking. I just needed to say it out loud. I needed you to know that I'm sorry. For a long time, I stayed silent. I could feel the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on me. Finally, I took a deep breath. I appreciate you saying that, I said quietly. But I'm not the same person I was a year ago. And I don't think I'll ever be able to look at you the same way. You can't just erase what you did. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I know. I just wanted you to know that I see you now. And I'm proud of you. You've done something I couldn't even imagine. And for the first time, I believed her. As we sat there, the tension hanging between us, I felt a strange sense of calm. I wasn't angry at her anymore, not in the way I had once been. Part of me had expected a dramatic outburst, a confrontation where we'd exchange bitter words and accusations. But instead, she was sitting there, genuinely remorseful, and I realized something that surprised me. I didn't need her to apologize to feel better. I had already moved on. I leaned back in my chair, staring at her for a moment, weighing my options. I had worked so hard to get where I was. I had found my strength in a place I never thought I would. Victoria's cruelty had been the catalyst, yes, but now, I was in control of my life, and no one, least of all her, could take that from me. You know, I began, my voice steady but deliberate, I never needed you to approve of me. I never needed your validation. But after everything that happened, after the wedding, after Paris, what you really took from me was my peace. And for that, I don't think I can forgive you. Not right now. Her face fell, and I saw the tears begin to well in her eyes again. I could see the remorse in her expression, the way she regretted everything she had done, but I also saw something else, the realization that she was no longer the center of my world. It wasn't about revenge, not in the way people usually think. This wasn't about making her feel small or humiliated. It was about me standing up for myself. I wasn't the girl she had put down anymore. I wasn't the girl she had discarded in favor of her perfect, glamorous world. I had created my own world, and it was bigger, brighter, and stronger than anything she could ever have imagined. I can't pretend it's all okay, I continued. But what I can do is move forward. And I can't allow you to take up space in my life any longer. So, this is where we leave it. For a moment, we just sat there in silence, both of us processing the weight of the conversation. Victoria seemed to understand what I was saying without words. She wasn't going to get back into my life easily, and frankly, I wasn't sure I wanted her there. After a long pause, she stood up, her movements slow, her shoulders slumped in resignation. I'll leave you alone now, she said quietly. You've earned your place. More than I ever did. I won't bother you again. And just like that, she walked away, leaving me to sit there, feeling a strange mix of relief and empowerment. There was no need for me to continue being tethered to the past. Victoria had apologized, and whether or not it was sincere, I was done. My journey was my own now. The months that followed only reinforced my sense of self. The Versace campaign took off, and my career reached heights I had never dreamed possible. The photo shoots were grueling, but exhilarating. I traveled across the globe, meeting some of the most influential people in the fashion industry. I had become more than just a model, I had become an icon in my own right. It was during this time that I received another message from Victoria. But this time, I didn't feel the need to read it right away. I wasn't interested in more apologies or explanations. What had happened between us was over. I had closed that chapter, and I didn't need to open it again. When I did read her message, it was a simple one. I saw your campaign. You're amazing. I just wanted to say, I'm proud of you. It wasn't the kind of message I expected, nor the kind I had hoped for. But somehow, it felt like the final piece of the puzzle. It was her way of admitting, without saying it directly, that she had lost in the only way that truly mattered, by seeing me succeed. And that, in itself, felt like the sweetest form of revenge. A year later, I was standing on stage at the prestigious CFDA Fashion Awards in New York, accepting the Model of the Year award. The room was filled with industry giants, designers, and celebrities. I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride as I took the stage. And then, as I looked out over the crowd, I saw her again. Victoria. She was sitting in the audience, looking not like the woman I had once known, but like someone who had lost the fight she had been waging all these years. She wasn't the center of attention anymore. It wasn't just that her beauty had faded or that she had lost her position in my life, it was something deeper. Something inside her had cracked. And I realized, in that moment, that I had already won. Not because of the success, not because of the fame or the runway walks. But because I had found something that she would never have, peace. After the ceremony, I didn't go searching for her. I didn't need to. I had already said everything I needed to say. I was moving forward, and there was no reason to let the past chase me anymore. But as I was leaving the venue, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around to find Victoria standing there, her face soft and weary. I don't expect anything from you, she said quietly, her voice tinged with sincerity. But I wanted you to know. I see you now. For who you really are. And I'm sorry it took me this long to realize it. I studied her for a long moment, weighing the significance of her words. And then, without a hint of bitterness or anger, I replied. Maybe you needed to see me for who I really was. But I've already moved on. And I'm not going back. She nodded, a single tear rolling down her cheek. For the first time in a long time, I felt no anger. Just a quiet sense of finality. She was no longer a part of my story, and I was okay with that. As I walked away from the CFDA Awards, the weight of the past finally lifted from my shoulders. I had faced everything that had been thrown my way and come out stronger for it. And I realized something powerful: there was no greater revenge than living well, thriving, and finding peace within yourself. And for the first time I was free.